All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our February virtual tasting for the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club. So excited to have you here and very, very excited to have our special guest, the Queen of Slow Wine, as we are coronating her this time. This is Martha Stoumen is joining us. As always, we love to hear your comments, want to hear your comments, throw them in the chat. We're going to have everybody muted during the discussion, but we will read your comments, read your questions while you are listening to our conversation. So do that. Of course, if you want to replay any of this, we'll be dropping the replay tomorrow on our YouTube channel, so you're able to check that out. And we'll talk a little bit about our March winery, featured winery of the month at the end of this. But for now, because Martha is Allison's discovery, I should say, or Allison is the one who brought her to us. I am going to hand it over to Allison to introduce Martha.
Well, hi, everyone. And I'm very excited to be able to introduce Martha's Wines to everyone. I had the privilege of meeting Martha a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. I was traveling with a journalist, Robert Camuto, who had written a book, South of Somewhere. And in between doing events for his book, since he lives in Italy, we decided to visit producers who focus on Italian grapes. And that is how I met Martha. And I was immediately enamored with her wines, with her personality, with everything. And I thought she would be perfect for this group. The cool thing is that while I focused on Italian grapes that period of time, she does not do exclusively Italian grapes, but also works with Rhone grapes, which she'll talk about tonight. So I think you're in for a treat. For me, it's a treat because I have not tasted these 4 wines, so they're a first for me. But if they're anything like her Negro Amaro Rosé that I've had or any of her other wines, I know we're in for a treat. So you're going to learn a little bit about slow wine today, what that means. And I think you'll be really impressed with the authenticity of Martha and the passion of her wines. So
nice. So Martha, we always start off our virtual tastings by asking you, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you've ever opened?
This was a really hard one, I know. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, I think I have to go back to, there are many wines over the years that have taken my breath away, but the one that's become personally the most interesting to me was a wine that I had. I was studying at UC Davis, viticulture and enology. I had already done some apprenticeships, internships with a few vineyards and wineries, and a friend of mine, Junichi Fujita, who was really interested in wines that are made with very, very minimal intervention. He brought these 2 bottles from Sicily to a tasting. One was from the southern region in Victoria, from a producer called Kos, and the other was from Mount Etna from a producer called Frank Cornelissen. And we tried these side by side, and I hadn't had many Sicilian wines, and I hadn't really had this type of, a lot of people use the word natural wine, other people use minimal intervention, but whatever it was, I hadn't had that many of these type of wines, and especially the Coast wine just floored me. It was just, again, something that it felt like it was singing in the loudest voice possible, but it was also very delicate, and I just fell in love with it so much that I ended up writing the producer and later working there, doing a harvest internship. I went back 2 years later and I became a brand ambassador for them while I was starting my own label. So it was very long, ongoing.
Wow.
This one bottle just really set my life in a certain direction. And I still have one of the Coast bottles up in a little nook in my house. It was the first bottle I brought to my now husband's house when he was having a dinner party, and he ended up saving it because he thought he said, I think this might be something special, the wine, the person, whatever it is. So it's just kind of been this bottle that keeps showing up in my life again.
And you've never opened it?
No, we opened it and drank it. It's an empty bottle. Yeah.
Yes, but apropos for a post Valentine's Day virtual tasting. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, today's virtual tasting is brought to you by Coast Wines. Have you ever thought about natural wines from? I'm going to do like a podcast ad roll in this one.
I know you'd think that I'd be getting some sort of kickback for all this, but
At this point, is that COS? Is that how you spell cost?
Yes,
Okay.
COS, and they're beautiful wines from the only DOCG in Sicily. I highly recommend seeking them out. They're in these squatty little bottles, so very memorable to find.
Hey, Martha, I got a question for you back to what you said, and I'm just going to jump in with this one. You know, everywhere on your website, it talks about being slow wine and patience. And then you just said there are two words people use. Do you like to be minimal intervention, or do you like to say natural?
Oh boy, it's a hot button topic, which I don't think should be as divisive as it is, but it's, yeah, I say natural in some regards, but really the patience thing I think is and slow kind of are the best qualifiers, because it's not, I think natural wine or minimal intervention wine just focuses too much on only what you're doing at the winery and not the farming that's leading up to that, or the, you know, intention, or the, you know, you're actually taking the time to age the wine out without kind of adding things into the wine that would speed that process up. So the idea is really trying to go back to the like deep craft of winemaking and the respect of that, and farming in a way that, you know, we're going to be able to hopefully do for generations in the future. So yeah, I think natural wine became very popular, and while I'm happy about that, sometimes movements that become popular end up getting
well, you ride the tide. You ride the wave like a surfer. Exactly.
Yeah. So
nice. Yeah, you know, there are obviously some celebrities who have kind of jumped on to that train. What are your thoughts on the celebrities? Is it the rising tide that lifts all boats, or do you think it's been detrimental because of the quality and some of the backlash that's been happening to the natural?
Yeah, I'm always a rising tide lifts all boats. I don't know. I tend to I guess I tend to be an optimist, and I just think that you know, anything that kind of expands their engagement with wine and farming is a good thing. So, you know, and I don't think everyone has to like or believe in the same things. That's part of the beauty of it. So
yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how you came up with the name for your wines, because, you know, it's such an interesting name for a winery and so original. No, I'm kidding. But take us through how you got into wine. You mentioned that you did the enology program at UC Davis, as you had mentioned to us before. You did your undergraduate at UCLA. So how does one go from, you know, UCLA to Davis enology?
Yeah, I went down, so I grew up in Sebastopol in Sonoma County, which is a very, if any of you have been, it's a very small town, hippie, earthy, maybe the only Greenpeace majority town in the country, I don't know. But so I definitely have some of that in my roots, but I wanted to go to school in LA and be in a city and get to experience other things. So, but I think when I was at UCLA, I started studying agriculture of all things in the middle of a city, and went to work on a small farm in Tuscany when I graduated. Mostly for me, it was to avoid trying to get a real job. I wasn't sure. I've always been super curious, but I'm a generalist, and I so didn't commit to my major until I absolutely had to, and then I committed to geography, which is the broadest major I think you could possibly be in. And then, but
you can name all the capitals of every European country and most of the African nations.
If only. But and I'd minored in Italian. My grandfather was Italian, and I wanted to kind of bring that back into our family. So I went to work on a small farm in Tuscany, and they put me in the vineyard and in the little cantina where they made wine, and the olive orchard. And it was so much fun. I felt like I was like a little kid at summer camp. And then someone came to the farm and said, "Oh, are you doing this to become a winemaker?" And it was like, I hadn't even thought about that up until that point, that that's a viable job. Someone has to make wine in the world. And so started pursuing that and traveled all over the world. Did about 3 years of apprenticeships, decided to go back to Davis, and then did another 4.5 years. So I did about 8 years of apprenticing before starting my own business.
That's a lot of time to be apprenticing, because a lot of people sort of take an assistant winemaker job and stay put, maybe, in the off season go south of the hemisphere to hit New Zealand or South Africa or whatnot. But you were on the road. Was that intentional? Did you just really want to see as much of the world, see many different styles of winemaking as possible?
Yeah, that was definitely it. I mean, I remember my dad having a phone call with my dad. He was like, "Really? You're moving to where now? After 6 months, what's going on? When are you going to get a full-time job?" But I'm extremely good at being frugal. So definitely, a lot of these internships, it's just room and board. And then
we can tell from your background how
excellent
I know you are at being frugal. Art is a frivolous purchase and it's not in our budget.
Chris, not everybody wants to have art of dogs surrounding them.
Hey, this is a famous San Francisco iconic piece right here.
Oh, I love it.
That is me and Percival from a famous artist. So there you go.
It's good. I've been meaning to hang up the art. We have a little bit, but but yeah, it's true. Yeah, the frugal part. So, but mostly, I wanted to just travel around and see what other people were doing. And anytime I thought, okay, maybe now I'll settle down, something else came up. Like there's this producer in the south of France that works with cows in the vineyard, and he, part of your job would be herding cattle and caring for pigs and seeing how the animals integrate in the vineyard. And I was like, oh, well, before settling down into full-time job, I got to go learn that.
Yeah, I hear that wine is bullshit.
With your internships, were any of them in the US, or were they all in Europe, or any in South America or the other side, anywhere?
Yeah.
As a geography major, please list the countries and capitals where you did your internships.
Don't put me on the spot. No, I did work in Sonoma County for a little bit, and West Australia. I was in New Zealand for almost a full year. So that was me getting an assistant winemaking job and thinking I would stay for a little bit. But yeah, and then Germany and the Mosel, which was a really cool experience, working on those steep terraced everything.
Wow.
You pick your grapes into a backpack, and it goes down a little monorail that you've built by hand into the stone. I mean, talk about patience. So yeah, south of France, Sicily, Tuscany. It's been pretty good.
Wow.
So,
and we'll get to our next question, but if you haven't opened up the first wine, which is the 2021 Honeymoon white blend, please go ahead and do that, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But now, with all of these internships with all these countries, is there any one of them that kind of stood out as really like spearheading your? Obviously you took different things from each, I imagine, but is there one of them that really stood out and kind of getting you to want to start your own label, or getting you into the style of winemaking that you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always kind of a slow progression. And again, I grew up in an area where we had a big garden. My parents had a big garden. My mom's a gardener, actually, and we had an old apple orchard. So always was drawn to some of these smaller producers that were doing a lot of things by hand, that were really involved in the vineyard. And things kind of built on one another. But I'd say that experience in Sicily, mostly because I became so close with the owner, and he and also his niece, who has her own winery, became, I'd say, mentors. Also just kind of like tough love, just telling me like, what are you doing? You've been apprenticing for long enough. You're never going to know everything. You just have to start. And that's part of the process too. And I was like, well, California's expensive and you don't understand. And they're like, no excuses, just go back to California, figure out a way to start your own project. So enough tough love that kind of works on me, I guess.
Yeah.
But
So that,
California was the place you wanted to come back to?
I think that was another thing. Being in Sicily, most wine regions have a lot of pride. You'll talk to the people who are there and farming, and it's not just, here are my grapes, here's the land, here's how special it is. It's like, oh wait, I got to take you to the cheesemaker up the mountain. And, they're really showing off everything about their entire territory that they really love. And I remember being in Sicily, and it's like, it's true when people say that Italy isn't one country, it's many different regions, and
oh, yeah.
you may think you know how to make pasta up in in Rome, but
Milanese pasta is different from Napolese pasta.
Exactly. And so I found myself, when Giusto Occhipinti was telling me about how much he loved his home and this and that, and I was like, oh, I'd love to take you to California and show you the redwoods and the mountains and the oysters, and just all the things I love about California started coming out as like a counter conversation. And then I realized, oh, I should probably go back there. I guess I really love it, just thinking about it. So yeah, so
nice.
I did.
So you got the tough love, you're back in California. So, what was the next step to launching Martha Stoumen Wines? Were you searching for vineyards? Did you know you wanted to work with Italian grapes? What was the process there?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to work with organically farmed grapes. That was really important to me. I also really love older vineyards. I think the fruit balance is really incredible. A lot of the things that are traditional for a reason. I mean, something someone's always asked me, told me to question is, okay, is it traditional just because, it's been passed down and we don't actually know the root reason why we're doing this? Or is it traditional because it actually has become the best way to do things? And so, yeah, I wanted to work with old vines. I wanted to work with dry farm vineyards, and I wanted to work with organic fruit. And then also, I didn't own my own land. I didn't, barely owned anything after 8 years of really not much pay. So I got an assistant winemaking job at a cellar in Berkeley called Brock Cellars. I was talking with three of my friends from Davis, and we decided to kind of put all of our pennies together and start an umbrella business where we could all make wine underneath it. And one of my friend's parents had a really big basement, and we actually got it bonded legally as a wine cellar. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, so we were pitchforking fruit down a big water pipe through a window into the basement, into these little bins that we'd ferment in. It was very, talk about primitive. And it was in Orinda, of all places.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Which is another thing, because it's like taking a flatbed truck full of grapes, up through the
suburbs, basically. Yes.
Yeah, I think people were like, what is going on here? That person's lost. So that's really how things got started, and a lot of just kind of sweat equity until we sold our first bottles. So that was in 2014 when I started. And then, soon thereafter, my friends and I realized that 4 winemakers and nobody that really knows how to do accounting or law or anything else maybe isn't the best recipe for business partners.
Too many chefs, not enough cooks, kind of thing.
Exactly. And so we all parted ways, and that was a launch pad for our own projects.
So you started in 2014, and your first vintage was that same year, or?
Yes. Yeah, I started looking for fruit and in 2013, before harvest 2013. And it's funny, a lot of the growers, they were like, oh, so you want to purchase some fruit this vintage? And I was like, no, I just want to check out the vineyard for next year. And they're like, okay, call me in a few months. I'm focused on this vintage. But it was great being up in Mendocino County, which is where this wine and actually, let's see, most of the wines have some component of that.
Have a Mendocino, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah. But it's a lot of wonderful farming families who've been there for generations. And most of the farmers I work with are all in their 70s. And it's great for me being first generation, wine is, we talk about slow wine and patience. It takes time to learn how to farm grapes well. It takes time to learn how to make wine. And so not having my parents or grandparents in the business, I can learn from these farmers as well. They're kind of, I think of them as my extended wine family, which is pretty cool. So
are you sourcing from other areas or entirely from Mendocino?
Yeah, I source from inland Mendocino around Ukiah area. I source from Contra Costa County, so kind of close to Brentwood area. I don't know where you all are from, but
Southern California folks, but I'm up in
Okay.
Paso Robles. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, if you're in San Francisco and you basically drive, an hour and a half to 2 hours in any direction, that's where I source fruit from. So not Napa and Sonoma, although I live in Sonoma County, but north of that. And really that driving distance away from San Francisco seems to be where all of these old vine dry farmed vineyards still exist.
You said
so
2
they're having
hours on the outskirts around.
Yeah, more or less.
From Mendocino down to Lodi, Sierra foothills. Yeah, you've got a lot of the older vines in that area. It's actually, we talk about slow wine, but that's the slow food movement, which is that, everything is supposed to come from within 100 miles of wherever you are, if memory serves. So.
And an interesting thing, maybe it's worth noting, and you can talk about this, is that, we often think, you said inland Mendocino, and a lot of times when we hear Mendocino, we think about Anderson Valley and the cool climate Pinot and Chard areas, but inland is a little warmer and you're working with completely different grapes than Pinot and Chard.
Totally. Yeah, there's still a little bit of Pinot and Chard in certain pockets, but yeah, inland it's much more continental. So you'll get, during the hottest part of the year, you'll get up to 90, 100 degree days for a very short period of time. And then you might drop down to 50 degrees at night. It's a pretty crazy temperature swing, and it's much more continental. It's where the Russian River originates. So we think of Russian River Valley as Sonoma County, but it actually originates in Redwood Valley and Mendocino and goes down through the Ukiah Valley. And so you do get some fingerling fog up there, but not nearly as much as in Sonoma County.
Yeah, it sounds very close to what we have here in Paso Robles, that huge diurnal temperature shift. Very hot days, but cooler nights. Not as hot, but not as cool as well. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about do some slow wine definitions, but since you're talking about old vines, legacy vines, that's a perfect segue into the Honeymoon White, which is 65% Colombard, 35% Chardonnay on this one. So you've got kind of the old school legacy grape of California, that that French Colombard, that and Chenin Blanc, the two staples of the wine industry from pretty much everything pre-1980. And then obviously Chardonnay, which was grown before, but thanks to the judgment of Paris has become, California's primary planted grape in the area. So take us through a little bit of this blend. How did you come upon this Colombard? Was this did you know going in that you wanted to focus this blend on Colombard, or is this just kind of whatever you can get every year that's organic and old you put together?
Yeah. So the Honeymoon, the first year I was able to make it was 2017. I had been looking for, knowing again, to echo what Chris said, knowing that Colombard and Chenin Blanc were these kind of more heritage grapes, of course, not native to California, but have been around for many, many, many years. I was really interested in them because they maintain acidity in warmer climates. They maintain kind of a freshness, but also have ability to flush out the body. And Colombard, in many places has been written off as a blending grape. They, a lot of people say it's
cognac grape is,
or
it's kind of most
grape.
well known is for making the great cognacs of Cognac and Armagnac, the brandies there.
Exactly. And so I'd been searching for most of the old vine Colombard had been pulled out, but I had my feelers out, and I finally went to meet a grower who has some old vine Carignan that I wanted to work with. And I saw that there were white grapes as well at her property. And I said, oh my gosh, okay, what is this grape? And she said, it's Colombard. And I said, I've been looking for Colombard for years. Can you sell me any? And she said, well, unfortunately, this all goes to Germain Robin. It's gone to them which is a cognac style producer in Mendocino County. And, we've been selling them grapes for 30 years. So sorry, good luck, kind of, in a very nice way.
Thank you for playing.
Yeah, exactly. And then the same grower calls me up 10 days later and says, Germain Robin has just sold to Gallo, and we don't feel like we need to honor that relationship anymore. Gallo's a big business. They're fine. You can have as much as you want. So yeah, so I finally got to work with the Colombard, and it's a really special grape, especially when it's paired with these legacy vines where yields are naturally low. You're not getting kind of this, a lot of people planted it originally more for yields. They wanted higher yields, and that's what this grape can do when it's a young vine. But when it's an older vine, it has just really excellent balance. And yeah, it's something that I think you can you can mold in a lot of different ways as a winemaker. The sugars never spike, so you're not getting high alcohol. You can let it hang for a really long time to develop some of the beautiful honey notes in the skins that I really love. And so yeah, Colombard, one of its parents is Chenin Blanc, and I think it can lean into that if you let it hang on the vine late into the season. This is actually the last grape we pick every year. So we pick, it's actually the first and last, same vineyard. It's the bookends of harvest. We pick it early for more of a bright chocolatey style Basque almost expression. And then we pick it late October, early November for Honeymoon, for the more honeyed kind of character. So
interesting. So was the intention when you started making this in 2017, did you always blend Chardonnay in with it? Is that simply because of the yield with the older vines, or was it something that you had in mind?
Yeah, the very first year, I actually blended a little bit of Roussanne into it. Barrel fermented aged Roussanne. Everything is done in barrel and aged on lees, neutral barrel. But the Chardonnay, I've always loved. I mean, Chardonnay is grown everywhere, so some people love it, some people hate it. I don't know, but I think Chardonnay has the most amazing lees of any grape. So everything that, if you're aging on lees, Chardonnay is really, really, really special. But we get so much sun in California that I feel like all of our grapes have a really they're high on fruit character. So the fruit character is really easy to achieve in California. And for me, sometimes Chardonnay can almost be overly rich because of that. And so I thought blending it back a little bit with Colombard, you still have this kind of golden hour wine, is how I like to describe it. Good food wine, year-round wine. But it's dialing back the Chardonnay just a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you're letting the wine spend time on those spent yeast cells, the lees, it's adding that body, that richness to it, which you can pick up in this wine, because Colombard, while it has that high acidity, it can be a very thin wine. So it sort of brings the body to balance out that acidity, it feels like.
Exactly.
Do you think that the body of this wine is more from the Chardonnay, or it's the lees time?
I think it's actually from both. Again, because the Colombard vines are planted in 1948. There's not very many clusters per vine. You can get the concentration that you would otherwise, I don't think you wouldn't get with other younger vine Colombard. But yeah, we do. I think the Colombard does give some of the body. It just doesn't give the little bit of yeasty kind of note. It's more honeyed body, I would say, rather than the kind of what we typically think of Chardonnay. Yeah, I think the Chardonnay probably is a little weightier, but both kind of carry the body of the wine.
I think the wine has a beautiful texture, mouthfeel. It's what's exciting, I think, about white wines, that, red wines are great. Don't get me wrong. Love good red wines, love light-bodied reds and fruity reds and all that earthy reds. But when you have a white wine with texture, that there's nothing else you need. It's just, it satisfies the mouth, works with food, it's just complete.
I agree. Yeah, texture is a huge thing. All the wines I try to build in some sort of texture, and yeah, I think it's really important. Especially in California, we don't really, we don't have these calcareous soils, which can give almost, we don't have as much minerality as other regions. So I think compensating with building in layers of texture is really the way to make a complete wine here.
Yeah, no, it's very well balanced, and one of those unusual blends that you just don't commonly see out there. We always love to hear what some food pairings with this type of wine would be. So what do you normally recommend to pair with a wine like this?
Yeah, we recently had a team retreat where we all rented a house and cooked together, and we made really beautiful slow cooked salmon. So very it was from cookbook Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, her method of cooking salmon. So almost to the point where you can't overcook it, and you can just go about making other things on a bed of herbs. And it had this Meyer lemon herb salsa on it, which is really good with the Meyer lemon peel. So I feel like we made a farro salad with it that had some pecans. This can do a little bit of sweet, but I wouldn't go full sweet. But any of those beautiful fall winter dishes. I've had this with mushroom dishes as well. You can't go wrong with roast chicken. Anything that you would pair a French Chardonnay with, or something from, I would say, even the Sirah. I think this wine would do well with that too.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it would go really well with like peel and eat shrimp is something that sort of is coming immediately to mind, because it has that richness, that weightiness. There's even a little bit of sweetness with the shrimp, which I think having that honey note would really exacerbate that and bring it out on this.
I agree. Yeah, I had this recently with crab as well. Similar kind of thread that you're talking about, Chris.
Yeah, and it also feels, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it feels like it's a wine that could handle a little bit of spice, not heat per se, but if you had something like Old Bay, or with some paprika and a little bit of cayenne and whatnot in there, would pair well because of the weightiness of that mouthfeel, and I think that honey note.
I would even say you could take it onto your cheese board. I was at a lunch today where our 3 cheeses at the end included a Brillat Savarin, a triple cream, but we also had a goat cheese with ash rind from Indiana that was quite lovely, that I'm actually thinking about as I sip this. I'm like, yum.
Did you find any classified documents in that goat rind cheese?
No.
Okay, just checking.
I was just really surprised that the goats make such good cheese in Indiana. Who would know?
Well, there's a lot of trash there for the goats to eat, so it makes sense. I'm kidding. I don't mean to slag on Indiana. I apologize to the entire state of Indiana.
But do you?
Not really. Sorry, not sorry.
And just really quickly going back, you said that you use neutral oak on this. I know you do native fermentations, so native yeast as opposed to adding them. And then you're not filtering and finding it clearly from the cloudiness.
Yes. And certain years are clearer than others. And I should know this because I studied winemaking, but sometimes things are still a mystery why certain years are cloudier than others. But yeah, so unfined, unfiltered, really what we do is we crush the grapes. We either let them have a little bit of skin contact or not, depending on the vintage. Press the juice and then let them ferment on full lees and age on full lees in neutral barrel. So again, really trying to build in that texture throughout the process.
And at what point do you blend the 2 grapes?
That usually happens around now. So if this is harvested the Chardonnay is harvested earlier. It's harvested in early September, early to mid-September. And then again, the Colombard is late October, early November. And so we kind of let each lot of wine settle out. Everything goes through natural malolactic. We don't block malolactic. So again, that adds to some of the body of the wine. But we usually blend it March, April. So.
Nice. And I have to ask you about the beautiful artwork on the label, because you have a very similar motif on the Carignan, which we'll talk about. Clearly a signature for you. So who does your art, and what are we looking at? Is this a photograph? Is it an artistic piece? It's stunning in its intricacy, almost like a gill.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it does look like that. It's so the artist's name is Carolyn Haydu. She does a lot of collage work. Her work is beautiful. It's all this piece I think is around 3 feet by 4 feet. So everything on the label is a photograph of the collage, but they're all very three-dimensional and textured. And that was one of the things that really drew me to putting these on the labels. Is again, we talked about texture in wine and how important it is, and just putting an art piece that's very detailed. I mean, the amount of time she spends on each piece. So with the theme of slow and patience and texture was all things that I wanted to highlight. So.
Very nice. And that is an excellent segue into our next wine, which is the first of our two post-flirtation wines, the post-flirtation rosé. But we also want to talk about this slow wine concept. And, I think it's something that not a lot of people are, not a lot of regular wine drinkers, average wine drinkers are familiar with. It's kind of an up and coming concept. So can you kind of define it for us, walk us through it? And also, how did you get involved in the movement?
Yeah, well, I got involved in slow food before I got involved in slow wine, and actually being over in Italy and being at some of these smaller farms, before I was fully set on winemaking, after that first experience at the farm in Tuscany, I had a friend who lived in Turin, in Torino, where there's the big slow food conference, and that's the birth of slow food. And so, you'd go and you'd be walking around the city, and there'd be a gelateria it's a slow food certified. And I would ask him what that meant. And it's really about, I feel like Allison maybe can put this into more direct phrasing, but it's really about how have things been done? How do we preserve local foodways? How do we preserve traditional ways of making wine, of making cheese, of making, really anything that's local to your area. So it has a cultural component, and then there is an environmental component and a geographic component to it.
Yeah, and
so feel free to add to that. Yeah.
Well, I'm not an expert in it, but the slow wine movement, it came later after the slow food movement. I'm not, everyone always thinks slow and slow. I'm a contributor to the Slow Wine USA Guide. Last year was my first year contributing to it, where we profile winemakers who are following this, and I got to write the profile on Martha. And I just put a link in there if you're interested. It's a book. It's a guidebook of all the wineries, California, Oregon, Washington, and you can get 10% off through that. But it's a really great concept. The number one requirement to be in the US guide is that you do not use any synthetic herbs. And so that it seems like it wouldn't be a big order, but if a winery is certified organic, or a winery is certified biodynamic, or seriously practices either without certification, they do not use synthetic herbicides. We're talking Roundup, glyphosate, but simple Roundup. Sustainable certification does not mean they don't use it, because it is permitted to use synthetic herbicides with sustainable. So we are talking, when I talk to wineries who aren't certified or anything like that, they have to know what the vineyard managers are doing. We run soil reports to verify. We take it very seriously. So Martha clearly is focused on organic vineyards, so we don't have to question her too much. But it is a hard thing. And by the way, there was a winemaker in Santa Barbara that I was profiling last year, and I was talking to him, and he said, "Why are you up here?" I was there interviewing another winemaker, and I said, we're doing an interview for the Slow Wine Guide. And he kept questioning, like, why are you, okay, what? I said, well, do you use synthetic herbicides? He said, no. I said, would you, maybe we can talk. Have you been in the guide before? He's like, I don't know. Slow Wine Guide, I don't get it. Not only was he thinking slow coast, but the idiot was in the book the year before, so he should have known already.
That's funny.
Oh man. Yeah.
You're gonna have to tell us who that is.
But if you've traveled to Europe, Italy, Portugal, other places, you will go sometimes to restaurants where they'll say this is like slow food. Like I remember going to a restaurant in Porto that was like a slow cooked pork sandwich that took hours upon hours upon hours to prepare so that they could serve it at lunch, because it was slow cooked pork over this time, and the bread. And, they're really talking up about it's the artisan way, it's not this manufactured processed stuff.
Yeah. Now, Martha, you mentioned that you're looking specifically for organic vineyards. Like, what is your definition of an organic vineyard? Because there's, I know there's certified organic, there's now the regenerative organic, the ROC. So, what are you looking for in terms of the vineyards? And now that you have your own vineyard, obviously you are putting your own practices into place.
Yeah. So buckle up. I'll try not to get too nerdy and lose you here, but
that's okay. We're a group of wine nerds, so we can get into the weeds, and Allison and I'll do the best to put it in layman's terms as best as we can.
Yeah, no pun intended, into the weeds. So
True. With not synthetic weeds, by the way.
No. So yes, I would prefer that everybody I work with is certified organic. The 2 vineyards that I lease and farm are not certified, so I understand what it's like for a small producer with a very small vineyard to not want to go through the process of certification. But there are.
You should clarify. It's expensive, and it's usually a financial cost that people don't want to incur. It's not the process that people don't agree with.
Yeah. And it's also a multi-year process, if I remember correctly. You have to kind of show your organic farming over a series of years to get that certification.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a three-year process if you pass the audits every year. So for me, a lot of organic certified, there's a lot of things under the certified organic umbrella that you can still apply into the vineyard, but all of those things cannot be synthetic, so chemically manufactured. But for me, I'm really looking for, when I go into a vineyard, biodiversity. So that starts to lean more into the regenerative side of things. So regenerative really is talking about, at its core, the carbon balance in your vineyard. And that's become a lot more interesting to people as we've learned more about climate change and how, you can draw down carbon with agriculture, and how you can keep carbon in your soil, which is very important. So there's kind of, what we've really been practicing is a lot of those things. So I don't say we're fully regenerative, because we do till, we do cultivate, and that's one of the things. We don't do it very often. So, on the scale of no-till to highly tilled, we're closer to the no-till side of things, but we do that because we dry farm. So there's lots of different like push and pull things you should consider when you are farming. But yeah, absolutely no herbicides. No pesticides in the vineyard. We do use a little bit of elemental sulfur dust about twice a year. That's really it. And then we're doing everything else by hand. So if we're going to do any sort of weed removal, that's done mechanically with either an implement on the tractor or by tilling the soil a little bit and turning that green matter back in. So lots, and it's a very, to not spray herbicide is still definitely the minority of vineyards out there.
So what are some of the biggest challenges with keeping an organic vineyard? Is it things like if you have frost? Is it, rain and mildew and not being able to use copper sulfate and some of those things? Is it the keeping the grass and the herbs away so that the water is getting concentrated into the vines? What are the challenges that make organic farming something that not everybody is doing? Because it seems like if it was easy to do, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is not having as much control over your outputs. So in your vineyard, you won't have as much control potentially over your yields every year in and year out, which some businesses really depend on. I tried to build a business model where I had more flexibility with that and could take, years where I have more and years where I have less. This wine actually that you're drinking right now is a non-vintage wine. And so I tend to smooth out the inconsistencies that Mother Nature gives us with yields by sometimes making non-vintage wines. I also love what it does in the cellar, which I'll talk about later. But so I think that, mechanically removing weeds is very expensive, labor intensive. Or you can graze in there, but that's a whole nother, challenge is having
animals. You've got to own goats or sheep, and how do you pen them? How do you feed them? All that good stuff.
Exactly. So, but I think all of those things can be overcome if you're planning your vineyard out from day one to be organic, to be dry farmed potentially, which is not irrigated. So, I'm not as worried about things growing in my vineyard under the vines because I made sure I put everything on really drought tolerant rootstock that goes deep into the soil. And so it's my vines are looking for water at a much deeper part of the soil profile than the bits of grasses above. But not every vineyard has been planted out that way or planned, to have that sort of process. So it's a very holistic, intentional thing from day one. It's much harder to convert a vineyard to certainly dry farming, but even I would say organic that hasn't been farmed that way from day one.
And you mentioned that you're leasing and, have a couple of vineyards. Are those vineyards that you basically, leased the land and planted yourself? So you went in with that plan from day one as to putting it on that deep root stock, dry farming it, all of these things?
So I leased, these are the two vineyards I leased, I actually were already planted when I took them over, but it was a man named John Chiarito who definitely would have fit right along in the slow food, slow wine world. He did everything. I mean, craft, even beyond, like he would tie his vines to the post with willow, like willow tree or willow whips that instead. Yeah, I use twine. I'm sorry, I don't grow my own willow to tie my vines.
Hopefully it's a hemp twine.
Yeah, but he did everything so well that it was a wonderful vineyard to be able to take over when he decided to stop making wine and stop farming. So yeah, he from the get-go knew he was dry farming. He definitely and he planted some varieties that I was really interested in as well, some kind of lesser known varieties. So.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about the end product. What do you find that organic production, organic grape growing adds to the wine? Obviously, it can affect the yields and whatnot, but what are the benefits of it?
Yeah, so having healthy grapes come into the winery, I think that's, so let's talk, I'll use yeast, for instance, as something to talk about that comes really that starts out coming from the vineyard. I don't inoculate any of my wines, so I don't add any, commercial bagged yeast that's been isolated in a lab. I let whatever is on the grape skin and that kind of waxy cuticle you see on grapes, I let that ferment my wines. And I really love that because I think of it, there's so many different types of species on the grape skin. I like to think of it like lending a chorus versus a singular voice, which would be, you know, a single strain of commercial yeast that's been isolated. And so I just think your flavors can be so, for me, they're so much more compelling from native fermentations. I would say your highs can be higher, but your lows can be lower.
Right.
I
was thinking you have some bad yeast that can be in there as well that can definitely affect your fermentations and your winemaking.
Exactly. And so that is, if you do want to work with native yeast like I do, you have to have really healthy grapes coming into the winery. If you have, you know, if you had mildew early on in the vineyard, that really that happens early on in the grape's development before it's grown that much. And so as it tries to grow, the mildew scars will cause splitting, which then can cause botrytis, which can cause, you know, vinegar bacteria to basically form on the grape skin. And while you might not smell it, it might not be noticeable, those things multiply once they're in the fermenter. And so again, having healthy fruit, but then also going back a step further, if your vines are deep in the soil profile, for instance, with dry farming, your vines are taking up minerals at a different, so soil profile, you usually have organic matter at the top, and as you go deeper, you get more and more mineral layers, so more rock really. And so my vines will go down into that more mineral layer and actually pull different things into the vine, which then informs the fruit growth and flavors. So it's all connected, but I think it does, like all these little things definitely affect the final product. And yeah, and for me too, because I don't really mess with the juice chemistry. So once the grape's pressed, what's there is there. I always say that each grape berry is like a little winemaking pack ready to just be let loose.
It's a little carboy. It's a little carboy. It's just ready to be fermented.
And so, you know, having a healthy vine and healthy fruit means that the acid balance and the tannin balance and the ripeness is usually hopefully more in harmony. I'm speaking generalizations, but that's what I've found over the years. So.
It's an interesting thing because I remember years ago I was in Oregon on one of my first press trips, and it was one day with sustainable, one day with organic, one day with biodynamic producers. And when the biodynamic producers were asked, is your wine better because it's biodynamic? You know, they don't have a test A and a test B to be able to taste side by side, just like you don't. I mean, you know the health of your vineyard, but you don't know any different. And in also being in tune with your vineyard that way, you're a more informed winemaker, you're a better winemaker, you improve over time because of what you're doing. And that was their argument, is like, I'm a better winemaker because of the care I put in, but I don't know if my wine's better because of the biodynamics or I'm just more attentive now. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking about that because today I was at a lunch with a winery in Paso Robles that has converted part of their vineyard to regenerative and doing test runs. And we tasted the 2021 and 2022 Cabernet, picked on the same day, made the exact same way from two vineyards, one sustainable and one regenerative, to see if we could tell a difference. And while it wasn't grossly different, there was a nuanced difference. I mean, the sustainable one, the 2021, I thought had a little more, less integrated and jumped out a little more. And the regenerative had this nice roundness to it that, you know, I could tell the difference and I wouldn't have said they were identical wines. So there has to be something to be said. You know, he was saying bigger canopies, to what you're saying, deeper roots. I mean, these affect the results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like it also, again, it's the was it? Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance, the old management trope. But basically, if you can, you know, be as clean and organic as possible in the vineyard, it's going to make your job easier once those grapes come in, because you're not having to deal with stuck fermentations, you know, battling different things, having to, you know, add sulfates and whatnot in. It sounds like it's a much more natural process. Leading to a better wine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any winemaker wants to add things to your wine.
No.
It's more just like, you know, you do what you have to do to make the wine taste good and
Maybe
complete.
Gallo, but that's a whole
Yeah,
other
yeah, but exactly, that's a little more. But it is something that, yeah, if you start off with really great fruit, it just makes your job so much easier, because you're not just thinking about the flavors in the fruit, you're also thinking about like raising yeast. I almost think of it in bacteria cultures. You're trying to really or shepherd these living organisms, and just like any living organism, they actually, yeast and bacteria need the right amino acids and the right, nutrition, which is kind of crazy to think about. And grapes that are grown well, that have good soil health, I have noticed the vineyards that I work with that have the best soil health are the healthiest fermenters, meaning that whatever happens in the fermentation, it just usually goes along like clockwork. The chemistry is right. So it's really interesting to see. And while, there are things that you can buy in the wine industry, like almost like a vitamin packet, I'd think of it, but like, I don't know,
boosters.
You can't, they're
steroids.
Steroids
for your wine.
And they help, but it's like, as humans, we don't want to just survive on, vitamin packets. We actually need real food to eat, and yeast, I feel like you can kind of go along with the same metaphor for them. So,
yeah. I mean, obviously, like, you have certain advantages based on where you are. Like, dry farming doesn't work if you don't get rain. So being in Mendocino, where you get some rain, I mean, I know it's California still, enables you to do dry farming, which other regions may not be able to. And it sounds like cold regions that maybe get more stuck fermentations because of native yeast don't have the freedom per se to guarantee consistency as maybe you get to.
Temecula, not dry farming.
Yeah. There are some, within reason though, because most of Spain is dry farmed, very, very dry there. It's just, their vines are extremely spread out. Their spacing is very large. So you also have to have, I think you could dry farm grapes anywhere, but would you get enough of a yield to make a business out of it?
Right.
That's the question.
Well, that's why Spain loves their co-ops. Also, I've heard that the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. So okay, let's talk about this rosé. So this is 88% Zinfandel, and then basically this is the rosé. This is the anti-rosé. This is sort of going against all of the classic rosé rules. It's non-vintage, so you're blending two different vintages of wine together. You're actually blending a fair amount of white wine in with a red wine, which, that's the joke. Oh, how much white and red do you have to put together to get a rosé wine? So take us through how you came up with this concept, how you made it. And also, I have certain, thoughts in my mind when I hear the word post-flirtation, and I'm fantastic what your interpretation is.
Yeah. He's going to get his mind out of the gutter now.
Hey, Valentine's Day was 2 days ago.
You know what? This wine is supposed to stimulate whatever imagination you want to run with. So, so the post-flirtation rosé, this is something, as you mentioned, kind of going against convention, which I happily will do if that seems like the best way to make the fruit that I receive into wine. So the Zinfandel was made like a rosé. It was pressed immediately, so kind of like that whole cluster, almost, I guess, Provençal style of pale rosé. So it is a white Zinfandel, but it's not sweet and it hasn't spent any time on skin. So really going for the savory notes rather than the really like fruity notes of Zinfandel. And the Zinfandel comes from the Sierra foothills at elevation, mostly on decomposed granite and a little bit of clay. But this vineyard, even in a small amount of soil, I feel like the Sierra foothills in general is like a washing machine. It's like, what soils do you even have? It's a whole big mix, and what's 10 feet over here might not be over here, but primarily that. And And it's at elevation, so you do maintain a lot of freshness. So I thought this would be great for rosé. The Vermentino is something that is from Mendocino County, very close to where the Colombard was from. This is also dry farmed, head trained, and it was the first, 2019 was the first leaf, so meaning that's the first time these vines produced fruit. And we aged it for a really long time in barrel until it almost started picking up like Pinot type notes, getting a little oxidized, but also just kind of like, you think of like caramelized sugar without the sweetness, kind of those brown, those kind of beautiful brown notes that you find in like liquors. So I wanted to add a little bit of that into the blend to bring that texture and weight. So yeah, I drank a special rosé from Spain called López de Heredia, where they aged their wines for about 10 years before releasing them, which just sounds crazy for rosé. And it like blew my mind. And I thought, okay, I'll make a little baby like tribute to that. This is not going to be aged for 10 years, but getting a little bit of that aged character is just something we don't see in rosé very often, and I think can be really beautiful.
So Martha, I'm curious, and sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but
oh no,
you're passing notes in class.
So they texted me and said, "See the two guys there? This is them."
It reminds me of the Origin of Love sequence from Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Yes, totally. Oh, my husband drew this. It's something that.
Also, one's definitely feeling the other one up. Like I'm getting high school flashbacks from that.
Yeah. I told him whatever he drew, I wanted it to be, suggestive, but also your great grandmother could pull it off the shelf and not, be offended.
What is your husband's job?
He works, he's worked in and out of the wine industry, but he just loves, but he's always making art. He studied music, jazz composition. He writes songs. He plays a bunch of different instruments. He draws. He started writing a children's book. He's just nice. He's just a very constantly.
We need to work on his cropping skills, but other than that, it's fantastic.
I was going to say, but I know your post-flirtation wines are both non-vintage wines, and your Negro Amaro Rosato that I love is also a non-vintage wine. Are all of your rosés non-vintage? Is that intentional, or?
It depends. So I have started, the Negro Amaro Rosato that I make, I age for a while as well. And again, in these more recent years where we've had drought and I've been dry farming, the yields have been a bit of a roller coaster. So I also love the layering of, some of the tertiary characters from aged wines, and then some of the fresh fruit from, newer vintages. So I think, again, talking about those layers, putting those all together really makes a really fun, more complete wine. And I mean, obviously this has two people on it that are, I guess, people. Some are like, oh, they look like budding yeast. But this is not supposed to be within convention. Like, it doesn't have to, I don't feel like it has to be within the, I guess, normal winemaking standards. So, which is fun for me. I feel like I get to be creative and just make the wine that I think is going to taste good. So.
No, it's fun. And this is, it's a very unique tasting rosé in a positive sense. I'm not using that in a pejorative sense, but you're right. It has more of this kind of savory characteristic that I suspect comes from that near oxidized Vermentino, that kind of a richness. And there's just, the minute you taste this, you immediately think this is unlike any other rosé I've had. I mean, this is definitely not Italian Rosato. This is not a Provençal, rosé. This is not a California rosé. It is something wholly unique, which I think is so interesting about it.
Well, I just put in the chat on Martha's website she says drink when, so I added that to our chat, so you know when she says to drink it. I think her 3-year-old just got home.
You want to say hi, honey?
Hi there. How are you?
Oh, he went to preschool.
Oh, how was the pizza?
Yeah, you smell like pizza.
Did you have pepperoni? Okay.
Oh, yeah, you went to see our friends Ben and Alice. Well, sweetie pie, do you want to go back out with Dada?
Ask him what his high. He can stay. It's fine.
Oh, perfect.
Ask him what his high score in skee ball was. How many tickets did he win?
Yeah. What's your high score in skee ball? He doesn't even know what that is. Although we took him bowling the other day. It's pretty fun.
Nice.
Yeah. If you all haven't been bowling recently, bowling technology has come a long way with the bumpers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea. So you can play in the same lane as your kids or anyone else's kids.
There will be no gutter balls.
Yeah, and the bumpers just come up for their turn, and then they go back down, and you can just bowl yourself into the gutter as much as you want.
Oh, that's new. I've seen like where they had the inflatable gutter fillers that you had to play with the entire 10 frames, but
that's old fashioned.
Apparently so. I'm used to like rock and bowl is about my level of excitement when it comes to
Yeah. No, that's what I was used to too. The big inflatable things that look like almost like a fun house inflatable tube. And then everyone has to play that way. But no, this is great. So
I don't know. I feel like we're not teaching our kids well enough. Like they have to understand that the gutter ball is just a natural part of life. And you need to work hard to avoid the gutter.
I know. I told that to my husband. I was like, well, we can just play without bumpers. He's, and my husband's like, August is 3. He does not even know how to hold a bowling ball. Just let him have the bumpers.
But I would say, to going back to this rosé, just on to what Matt Arrigo had messaged me, like, yes, this is nothing like a Provence rosé, but I think those are kind of like fun, flirty wines you drink by the pool or you drink on a hot summer night. And this is a fun rosé, but serious enough to put on a table with your meal. It's not so fruity or just so bright and fun that's enjoyable, but actually food friendly.
Totally. Yeah, this is definitely a rosé for food. And, sometimes I think actually the labels might be a little too silly sometimes for what's in the bottle with the old vine, dry farmed, really textured layer wines that really stand up to food and, you can sip. But, when I started the business, I really wanted to put out a line of wines that just kind of no gatekeepers. You don't have to know appellations. You can just enjoy it. It's just on the table and it's clearly supposed to be fun. So
yeah. And this is so unique, so different. Pairings for this, what would you pair? Because it is such a unique wine. What do you normally throw together with this rosé?
Yeah, because of that, picking up on that kind of fino note, sherry note, I often think of Southern Spanish cuisine, I think, or kind of Spain in general, but I think this goes well with green olives. I've also had it with some, Sicilian Castelvetrano olives, but also there's a blanched, this is a little random, but it's a blanched almond gazpacho from southern Spain that has a little garlic in it. That's really good, and I think it goes very well with this. What else have I had this with that I really liked?
Apparently you recommend lemon ricotta pancakes and anything with caramelized shallots.
Yeah. The shallots for sure. There's a farro salad I make where you slowly fry the shallot in olive oil, and then you add a touch of, maple. It's really like not too sweet, but it has like anything that or an onion potato tart or like a tortilla española type thing. I think this would go really well with.
When you're in LA, there's a new restaurant, Bicyclette, that opened. That's Walter Mansky from Republique, his place. He has got an onion tart that is to die for. So you should take your wine and go to that restaurant and try it, because that onion tart was just out of this world.
Awesome.
Yeah, I could see this pairing with definitely like something with more of that herbal flavors to it. Like I'm thinking almost like a chervil salad or like a bitter herb salad would go quite well with this, because that just that unique greenness, that bitterness paired with this, I think would be a really, really interesting mix. So,
Great.
and Allison's ash washed goat cheese would be a fun one with this one as well.
From Indiana.
From Indiana, yes. Exactly. Mike Pence approved Indiana goat cheese. Perfect. So we'll stick with post flirtation, but we will move on to your red. And I am not even going to try to, name all the grapes that are in this. And clearly you don't either, since you just put California red wine on the back. But this is quite an amalgamation.
Yes. So yes, this is primarily, well, not primarily, 55% Zinfandel, 34% Pinot Noir, 8% Carignan, and 3% Petite Sirah. Believe it or not, I actually do make a red blend that has 2 more grapes in it than that, but we won't be talking about that tonight.
And you make a total of like 21 different wines, right?
Around that. Some come and go every year, or some come and go in the year, like some are one-offs and then some kind of stick around, or there are certain wines that I only make in the vintages that warrant them. So some of the Carignans I do, every few years. But
what's your average case production each year?
Yeah, it's grown over the years. I still consider us a young business. We're going on vintage number 10 this year, but
congratulations.
Thank you.
A decade of Martha Stoumen Wines.
I know, but it takes a long time to build up in the wine business. So we're currently around 8,000 cases, and actually post-flirtation red is about a third of that.
Okay. So this is, I imagine, your biggest distributed wine. This is kind of what the purpose of this wine is.
Exactly. And the idea behind this one, so the 2021 has a few additional grapes in it that other vintages haven't. In the past, this has mostly been old vine Zinfandel and old vine Carignan. So something that's very classic to California, something that Ridge does very well, and I definitely admire them for it. I decided to do it in, same sort of old vine mentality, vines that grow together and that really complement one another, but make it a little bit fresher, a little bit more, I don't know, like a Cru Beaujolais style drinking. So something that you can have, pairings for this wine, I think you could go all over the place with. So yeah, something that's supposed to be red fruited, juicy, just enough complexity and a little bit of tannin to keep it interesting. But the idea is that it's a wine that's going to be finished on your table, hopefully.
When did you look? And I'm not knocking the blend, because I know in Valle de Guadalupe they make these blends all the time. But what possessed you to put Pinot Noir in a blend with these grapes?
Yeah, so a lot of decisions in winemaking, I'll let you in on a little secret, has to do more with vintage, logistics, whatever. It's not just divine intervention.
It was what do we have left? Throw it in there. Great. We need to top it off. Beautiful.
Yeah. So our Carignan vineyard that we generally work with for this blend, of which there's 8% of this in there, but normally it's around 50%. This is a ranch that was planted out in 1948. And in 2020 was a tricky year for a lot lot of pandemic, and then we had the worst wildfires. Yeah, so smoke. Luckily, we didn't have smoke in 2020 in any of our wines, and then right after all of that, we had a weird winter cold snap before the vines went dormant. And it was so dry and so cold that it basically freeze dried the buds that would become shoots the next year. So luckily we didn't lose the vines in that vineyard, but we did lose a huge, this produced 8% of what it normally does, this vineyard.
Wow.
So yeah, we normally get around, I don't purchase all the fruit, but the ranch normally produces around 200 tons of fruit. And in 2021, we got, I think, 38 tons off the whole thing. So
wow,
it was, yeah. So we had to look at our neighbors and there was some dry farmed Pinot, actually a really cool vineyard that was planted in the 1950s. So pretty old for Pinot Noir in California, and also dry farmed, which is not really a thing that most Pinot growers do, very rare. And I worked with a grower with a Chardonnay and I said, do you have any extra Pinot this year? And he said, yes. And I said, great, we'll try it out and put it in the post-rotation. So I actually really like the earthiness it brings. And now I'm like, well, do I put Pinot in it every year? So.
Yeah, there's an amazing complexity to this wine. And obviously, at least from my bottle, we can see that it's non-filtered right away. You've got, the lees gathering right there. What I also find interesting is I'm even picking up, maybe this is, I don't know if it's just my bottle or if it's everybody's, but almost a little bit of effervescence, like almost a secondary fermentation that's going on in the bottle. I don't know if that was intentional or something that you've noticed with this, but it adds a brightness, kind of a sparkliness that I think really balances it out well. It's not cloying or kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, we do try to keep a lot of dissolved CO2 in all of our wines before we bottle them. So, which means, so all of the carbon dioxide that's produced during fermentation, we try to make sure we don't move the wines, pump them too much, rack them too much, so we can keep that carbon dioxide in solution, which is a natural way to protect the wine from oxidation. You don't have to add sulfur or as much sulfur.
Mm-hmm.
So, but this, I do think actually, I also picked up recently on a little bit of effervescence that I do think is more fermentation or microbial activity related. And I thought there was a teeny bit of Brett starting, which I really like in this circumstance. But, it's again something, this wine's in clear glass. It's meant to be drunk within, 2 or so years. So I'm not too worried about Brettanomyces. Is very slow growing.
Get Brett in your very, very clean winery?
This is a very good question. I actually haven't made a wine that has Brettanomyces in it since I started working in these wineries. So I suspect the Pinot, it was coming from the Pinot. I think it was probably there. And again, Brettanomyces is a super slow growing yeast, and it's kind of like a scavenger. It can exist in conditions when there's no other yeast really can. And Pinot has a higher pH than a lot of the more kind of Italian or classic California varieties that I work with. So it opens itself up to more microbial activity. So that's my guess, but who knows?
And for those, we haven't talked a ton of Brett over the course of our club here, but
because we never have Italian wines or French,
or French wines, French Sirahs or whatnot that are sort of classically known for it. But it is a yeast, a bacteria that it adds that kind of barnyard scent to a lot of wines, and it's a very controversial aspect, because there's some that believe once you have Brett in your winery, it's impossible to get rid of. And it can definitely leach itself into the wine. It adds that sort of barnyard note, which some people like myself believe that wines like Syrahs and other varietals are actually enhanced by having a little bit of that. But there are others that believe it's a flaw, and that, those wines are lesser than because of having Brett in them.
Let's clarify. It is a flaw. However, it is one of those acceptable flaws, like oxidation and like volatile acidity, that some people like. And if you cut your teeth,
That's like saying a redhead is a flaw. It's not. No, we don't believe in that here.
Myces, like oxidation, is considered one of the flaws in wine. Some people have no tolerance for it whatsoever and don't like it. But I think anyone who has cut their teeth,
You don't hang out with enough
Italian
French people.
or French wines, if you like, I learned to like wine on Piedmontese wines. I think to me, I gravitate to that earthy barnyardy thing, but I don't like when it's over the top, but I'm used to it. Other people absolutely take offense to it. So,
and I'm a Northern Rhone guy. And,
Yeah.
to me, the Northern Rhone, if there's not a little bit of Brett in there, it's a wine that it's lacking. It's less than. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, those things, like it's the almost, not that we're dosing this in, but I think about dosage where it's like small amount, I think adds really interesting flavors. If something off that flavor becomes the only dominant flavor, then
Right.
yeah, it's just a less interesting wine. But my friend was cooking Indian food, and I don't remember the name of this salt, but it was a sulfuric salt that he was cooking with.
oh, interesting.
But truly, he opened the little container, and it smelled like farts. Like it
Yeah.
smelled like a a container of farts that he was about to put in his food that he was making. But a little bit of that, I don't know, it totally changed the way the dish tasted. It was off. It tasted delicious. So again, it's one of those things where you're like, okay, a little bit kind of adds intrigue.
So what we've learned is that a post-flirtation period can be made better by a little bit of farts. That's what we've all
Exactly.
taken away
Or,
from it today.
think of it as like a lover's BO. Maybe you like it, maybe other people don't.
There you go. That is very French. So what I love about this, yes, I love about this red is that it's a lighter style red. You're right. It's very juicy. It's mouth watering. It really, excites the palate. Pairings with this, what would you think? My first thought with this was like pepper, like seared ahi, or even like raw ahi. Like I want poke with this.
Oh, I love that. I haven't heard that one. I think that's great. Post-flirtation for me is always like a taco wine. I think it goes really well. This is a little earthier because of the Pinot, but in the past, I've always said carnitas tacos because you have the I think Zinfandel often has like a hibiscus type character to it, or it can, which I think of the Jamaica aguas that you have when you're getting a taco at the taco truck.
Yeah.
But I also think this wine, we call this the kitchen chameleon. It will go with almost anything you put it with.
Yeah.
Because it's juicy. It doesn't have too much tannin. So,
Yeah. Even like Beyond Burgers would go great with this. Like, nice, good vegan, or even the vegan, the Beyond bratwursts and whatnot they have now. We have some vegans on, so I have to, throw them a non-animal based bone every now and then.
Nice. Yeah, I have two people who are vegan on my team, and they just, some of the stuff they cook, it's just incredible. So if you want a recipe for a tahini sauce that's really, really incredible, I can give it to you afterwards. But
nice.
Yeah.
But I think what's also fun about this is it's clearly, because of that brightness, you could throw a little bit of a chill on this. It would be a great summer red to take out there. Vegan sauerbraten. There we go. Jeannie's jumping in there with the choice. I love it. Beautiful.
Oh,
but yeah, you definitely like chill this down. I think it's still going to be full flavor. You get that acidity, that richness to it. It'll be a delicious wine. So, all right. Last but certainly not least, we're getting a little low on time, but hopefully you can stick with us after 8 o'clock. I know the boys are back, but let's talk Carignan. So we are massive Carignan lovers here. In fact, I haven't done the math, but I'm pretty sure that we have featured more Carignan in our wine club than we have Cabernet, which is fairly unprecedented. And we love our old vine Carignans. So take us through this one. Where is this from? Where are you getting it? Take us through this vineyard.
And this is the
Yeah.
long Elevage.
Elevage. Yes.
Yes. I love to hear that how much you love Carignan, because it's very true, like dear to my heart. I think it's one of the unsung, becoming slightly more sung California grapes that really deserve.
It was my favorite factoid is that it was the third most widely planted grape in California up until 1980.
Yeah. So, most of the Carignans you'll find out on the market, if it is a single bottling, is going to be old vine. There is not people are not planting new Carignan vineyards. Again, similar to Colombard, I think Carignan is definitely one of those grapes that does well with vine age. It kind of calms down its production. It becomes a little bit more, I think, in balance. I tend to think of Carignan as maybe because I love Cru Beaujolais so much, but like of California's version of like Gamay, where you can, it can kind of is that middle range, not super duper, heavyweight, but not super lightweight either. It's kind of that middle ground.
It's just right.
Yeah.
Well, and it
me,
has more of those sour cherry flavors to it, like that brightness, that good acidity. And this is the old vine Carignan. I have, there are a few hardy souls that are planting some younger Carignan vines out there, which, I am all for that. The more Carignan in California, the better. But yeah, the older, the better. And, we're down to, I think, like 100, 120 total acres of old vine Carignan at this point.
Yeah. It's there's not a lot of it out there.
This is from one of the vineyards you lease and manage, right?
No, this is from Venturi Vineyard, which was actually the first vineyard I started working with when I started the business. I've been making this from the same, I have a parcel contract, so I work with the same vineyard block every single year. I take whatever comes out of that, if it's high yielding or low yielding. And Larry Venturi, the farmer, he's a third generation grower. I haven't asked him, but I'm guessing he's in his 70s, and his relatives he combined these two branches together that are side by side. His wife's family is Piedmontese, his family is Tuscan. So very deep farming roots with him, and he has a really special vineyard. I think his soil type is really unique. It's this kind of Pinot gravelly loam, but it's a very it gives this really dusty tannin, and I notice it across all of his varietals that he plants. I find it really seductive. I liked when I was living in Tuscany, I also felt like they had kind of this like cherry and dustiness to the wines that I thought was just really gorgeous. And anyway, I love this plot. It's former Russian riverbed, so it's this kind of uplifted spine of a lot of river rocks and quartz in the soil. It's probably one of the rockiest parcels I work with. And again, what soil is there is this really kind of fine, dusty, and I feel like strangely the soil actually feels like it translates to the tannin. I make this in a very I was inspired by Northern Italian winemaking, the way I make this wine. So I ferment it 100% whole cluster. And what we do is the way we manage the fermentation, we foot tread it twice a day, and we slowly break up the clusters. So the release of sugars is very, very slow, which means that the fermentation is quite slow. If there's a lot of sugar there, and your yeast will start fermenting faster, and they'll generate heat, which will generate more yeast, which will generate faster fermentation. It's kind of a snowball effect. But when you slowly release the sugars that way, you maintain a cooler fermentation, which is means that the wine's more light-bodied, more kind of aromatically driven.
Yeah.
And then we do extended maceration on this, meaning we leave it on the stems and skins for a full month. before pressing,
Wow.
which is something, again, Northern Italian. Nebbiolo does this for much longer, but what actually happens when you leave grapes, so during fermentation, you start to release tannin into your wine from the skins and stems sometimes if you're on stems, and it will peak at a certain point. And then if you leave your grapes in that fermentation, if you don't press them off right away, what happens is tannins will start rebinding to those grape skins, and it actually stabilizes tannin and color. So that's what we do. And then we put it in barrel, and this got some extended aging. So spent just a little over a year and a half in barrel before we bottled it. So.
Nice. That's interesting about the longer Elevage, because obviously older vine Carignan, smaller bunches, smaller stems, thinner skins. So even with a longer maceration, you're not worried about over tanning it, because those skins are so thin and the berries are so small that you just don't have a ton of skin to have contact with the juice on it.
Yeah, and the tannin itself, when you do extended maceration like that, I feel like when you taste a young tannic wine, it's almost like all the tannin you can taste is in the front of your mouth. And the longer you leave it on the stems and skins, that tannin starts moving the way it hits your palate towards the back, strangely. And so I didn't want to I like this wine to have some tannin and some structure. It's, I think, meant to be, with food is how I usually like to have this wine. But yeah, still light bodied exactly. Not kind of heavily extracted. So.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated by the foot treading. Is it a way that because I imagine if you're foot treading, you're only getting sort of, the top 10%, 15%, where you're actually getting that crush. Obviously gravity at the bottom and then even the start of fermentation, the CO2 is breaking up those skins. So it's more of the carbonic fermentation style. But are you bringing up, and you're obviously not doing any sort of, pump overs or whatnot, but is there a way to bring up the grapes to the top?
Yeah, this is kind of the actually this is kind of the grab bag of fermentation management. So we start off foot treading. We do actually do some pump overs a little later on once the skins start softening and there's actually some juice to work with. And then we do what's called a delistage about halfway through the fermentation, where you drain all the juice out of the fermenting juice out of the tank to another tank, and then you pump it all back over the top of the skins and stems, and that's supposed to give you a little bit more mid palate. But yeah, so we kind of end up doing it all with this fermentation. But the idea is, again, just trying to keep it slow and steady.
Yeah, Michael wanted to know, what kind of barrels are you using for the Carignan?
Yeah, this is also neutral oak. It's a mix. We use used French oak. So generally speaking, I mean, I have barrels in the cellar anywhere from 4-ish years old, which is the newest I like to use generally.
Oh, wow.
All the way to about 10 or 15-year-old barrels. So, it's interesting. I think at that point, it's more about texture. So I've started noticing we use some Taranto. I still pay attention to the Cooper. I think a lot of people assume that if you're using neutral barrels, you don't really care as much about the Cooper, but a crappy new barrel is a crappy used barrel.
Well, yeah, I was going to
too.
say, even at 4, if you're using 4 as the newest, like, do you run into a lot of leakage issues? I mean, do you have ways to sort of represerve the barrels to prevent leakage?
Yeah, so sorry, we purchased used barrels from other wineries who have filled them with wine for the first 3 or 4 years of their life to take. So their wines have really absorbed most of that oak flavor. And then for us, it's more of a textural thing. But I do like, as a barrel gets older, the grains and the wood get tighter and tighter. So I do try to, I think we try to put in kind of medium aged barrels that do have a little bit more oxygen ingress versus some of our wines that we, you know, we want the really tight grain. It depends on the wine itself, what we end up using. So
Nice.
yeah.
So my theory about old vine, Carignan, whatever you want to call it, tomato, is it is the best, cover your ears, Mike and Jeannie. It's the best steak wine in the world. If I'm having a porterhouse or a ribeye or whatnot, this is what I'm reaching for, because it has that kind of rich, meaty, savory flavor to begin with, a beautiful, like thin but laser sharp acidity that runs through it. And then again, you mentioned those dusty tannins, kind of pillowy tannins, whatever it might be, but they don't overpower, but they match so nicely with a well integrated fat on a well marbled piece of steak. So I don't know if you have any other food suggestions, but
I want to high five you on that though. Everyone says cabin steak, and I feel like Carignan.
You
Yeah.
need to have that acidity to cut through the sinews of a meat, and old vine Carignan has that. So full disclosure, on Fridays tomorrow, I pour for a winery here in Paso Robles called Ranchero Cellars. Amy Butler is our winemaker, and she started Ranchero Cellars based on old vine Carignan. Still makes one from the Forcini Vineyard, not too far from you in Sebastopol, which I think those vines were planted in like 1942. So
Wow.
Very, very old Carignan. But yeah, wonderful. Go ahead, Allison.
Scott had a question, and Martha, maybe you can jump in this. Like, first of all, neutral meaning that the oak is no longer imparting any flavor, but don't they treat barrels after they've been used each year, so that you're not getting like the influence of the previous wine?
Yeah, so everyone has different kind of barrel care regimens, but yeah, neutrals, honestly, it's not the perfect word for it. Every barrel has some sort of character. It's just not the heavier oak flavors that you normally think of, the kind of vanilla-y or tobacco or whatever Cooper you end up working with. So the idea is that it's more of a textural component, and also has to do with just how much, you know, it allows your wine to get oxygen in the aging process. So that's why we like using quote unquote neutral oak. But yeah, so if a wine, that's something I actually can consider as well. I really try to buy my barrels from very specific places, and I think about what wine was in there before. So you know, I have some Cabernet barrels that I put certain wines in and I don't put others in. You know, I think there's a lot of these Carignan barrels actually had Malbec in them before, which I think is kind of a fruitier. Again, it's not going to overpower or go from a Pinot barrel to Carignan, but try not to go stronger flavors back to Carignan. But we can steam barrels is one thing that a lot of people do, which pulls some of the wine flavor out of the wood. Or some people just rinse their barrels. And then if they are empty, they are stored with sulfur dioxide in them, so they don't you don't get vinegar buildup, vinegar populations built up in the wood. So
yeah, normally the barrels are stored with liquid in them in some way, so that you don't have the drying of the wood and you keep it moist. And I think, as Martha was saying, while a little bit of wine is leaching in there, what's leaching more in and out is the tannins. So you're not necessarily getting the flavors of the other wines. It's more of the tannic structure and feel of the wine. But you must be an angel to a lot of wineries out there, because, you know, normally after like 2 or 3 years, most people are sending their barrels to the planter people to cut them in half and turn them into decorative garden fixtures. So
yeah, I know. I mean, for me, as long as it's not like too funky. If the barrel gets funky and gets microbial, like if you get vinegar in the barrel, I obviously won't use it. It goes to the planters. But yeah, those older barrels that have the tighter grained wood, I really like. So
How many years will you use it after? Like if you get it at 4 years old, will you use it 2 years, 4 years?
Sounds like a decade she'll use it up to.
I'll use it as long as the barrel stays healthy. So, you know, I was visiting a producer.
Martha, are you a hoarder?
You know, exactly. That is actually one of our projects this year is we're going through and we're going to cull some barrels. So, you know, but I did tell my assistant winemaker, I was like, Tim, I think it's time to clean out the old closet, AKA the cellar. We're not wearing it, it needs to go. But yeah, those older, I mean, again, we talked a lot about patience, but that like tightening of the wood grain, all that stuff just takes time. And so if you can keep the barrel healthy, I'm all for keeping it around. I tasted a Marsala that was in a barrel that was, I mean, the Marsala itself was started in 1901. So I'm assuming the barrel is older than that. And you know, that still, yeah, wood can last. And if the barrel's well made, it's, yeah, nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, as long as you keep it topped up, don't allow oxygen to get in there and keep everything moist.
Unless unless you like the Sirah method, in which case you do want it to come out, you know, angel share.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. It was a Sirah, the 1901 Marsala. Yeah.
I think one thing that I'll just never forget when we met and you said this, I think you put a lot of care into your wines. Obviously, you're saying it's the quality of the grape and then you're kind of hands off, but there's a lot of care that goes in the vineyard. But the prices of your wine are still exceptionally affordable. And I just always remember the one thing you said, which is you make wine that you and your husband can afford to buy, and that it's not about ego. And I mean, that's always kind of stuck with me, because as I was talking to someone even just yesterday who was talking about a wine they had that wasn't that memorable. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great, but it was like a $65 sparkling wine in Santa Barbara of a younger brand. And they're like, even if it was 25, I wouldn't have bought it, but 65, you know, like, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, you got to get the ego out.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a kind of a tension with the pricing, because it's obviously expensive to make wine in California. But I think personally, again, maybe this is the frugal person in me, but like, I don't think you need a ton of fancy equipment to make wine. You don't need necessarily like, you know, a palace to house your barrels in. So cutting back on some of that, I always wanted wine to be as accessible as possible. I, you know, had to save up for a lot of my early bottles of wine. And maybe if I charged more for my wine, my husband and I could drink more expensive wines now.
Yeah, but the problem is those more expensive wines are just not going to be as good as the wines that you're making. You know, that's you're at some point you're paying for marketing and, you know, physical plant and, you know, the $500,000 per acre that you bought your land in Rutherford for.
Totally.
So,
yeah, exactly. For us to make, you know, a 15 or under $1 bottle of wine, like we couldn't do it with the way we farm and the way we work, but we really try to price it so it can get out to a bunch of different people. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So we've only kind of, again, 4 wines of the roughly 20-ish you make every year. We've only kind of scratched the surface of your portfolio, but
haven't even touched the Italian side.
Yeah, I was going to say, take
know.
us through some of the other highlights that you make, some of the other wines that you're super proud of. Allison's mentioned, you know, Negro Amaro. I know you also work with Nero d'Avola, which is a grape that's not readily available here in California, but is one of the main red grapes over in Sicily. What are some of the other wines that you're making that you're really proud of that people should know about?
Yeah, I think if you liked that rosé, the Negro Amaro, I think is even, you know, it's in a similar vein, but even I would say a step up from there. It's a really interesting, you know, aged rosé from a grape that's very, very uncommon here in California, and it's you know, where it is common, where it's from. In Southern Italy, I make it in a way that's different than the way they make it. I've tried to read back in some of the text. And,
even in Puglia, it's not it's a secondary grape. I mean, behind Aglianico and some of the others. So yeah.
Exactly. But it really shines in this vineyard that I work with. You mentioned Neredavla. That's also a grape that's true to my heart. There's a lot of reasons, but I think it's a really interesting grape that kind of has, it's not quite as, you know, Syrah is very Syrah, like it's very understandably meaty and all that, and Neredavla is almost a step back from that. But I think of them in similar ways, where they can age and go beautifully with food, and they can have some savory kind of characteristics to them. Vermentino, I'm really excited about this. So you got to try.
We call that roll around here.
Yeah, exactly. It is a grape. I feel like that is made for California. I see people who have been planting it, more and more is being planted because it just does so well. It's this dry farm vineyard, the Venturi Carignan that you just tried. We work with Vermentino from that vineyard as well, and it's excellent. And we ferment that in a big clay big stoneware jar. So talk about neutral.
Amphora.
An amphora. So let's see what else. I could go on and on. You might have to pull me off the stage with
that's
that.
Okay. We've got a hook if we need it. But we did have some inquiries as to the Negro Amaro Rosé. Is that something that's available now? Do you have a new bottling of it that's coming up soon? Is it exclusive? Can it be bought online?
You can buy it on our website. I believe occasionally it is wine club only if the yields are such that we only have enough, but I think right now we have some available on our website. So yeah, you can order it off of there. It's a non-vintage wine, so the current iteration is non-vintage number 2, and it's drinking really excellently. It's the wine that I actually was just blending today. We're going to bottle next week. So we'll bottle non-vintage number 3 next week, but we usually bottle age that for at least 6 months before releasing it. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Nice. Excellent. And so if folks want to buy wines from you, get in touch with you, I know you make your wines at the Pax Winery space in Sebastopol. And I think they can arrange private tastings there. They don't normally pour your wines, but you can arrange private tastings. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you or your team? Because you do have a team behind you, which is exciting.
Yes, it is. Yeah, we are a team of 5 1/4, although I shouldn't call Anna a quarter. She's amazing. And she's actually,
I think that's ableist.
Yeah, she homeschools her kids, so, you know, isn't working full time, but she's wonderful. And she's actually probably the person who would be in touch with you the most. She's our customer care person. And so you can email Anna at marthastoumen.com. You can look, our website's very user-friendly in terms of shoppability. So you can look around. We ship to most states, so you can see what that would look like, but certainly within California, if you're all mostly from Southern California.
I think everybody here is California based.
Yeah, and we do have a wine club, which is really fun as well, and our wine club members get $25 flat rate shipping all the time, which compared to Amazon doesn't sound like a deal, but for heavy wine, it's actually great.
In the wine business, that's a very, very good deal. So that's fantastic. Nice. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we learned a ton, very educational. You are exceptionally charming. So
thank you.
Yes. She does not have a tasting room, Michael.
No.
Again, they make, go ahead, Martha.
Yeah, we one day hope to, and we'll try to be working on it. But yeah, we share a cellar facility with Pax Molly Wines. He has a tasting room up front. You can do local pickups at that tasting room if you order online. And then we do events from time to time. So we will actually be in LA, I think, if you're down in that area. at
See a lot of
Keith's
interested eyebrows arching up at this point.
yeah. Right now I have it as a hold on the calendar, but yes, I believe it's the 25th of March. We'll be pouring our spring release at Keith Ceramics. So stop on in and say hi and come taste with us. So
Unless you're, up in Paso with me that day, which I know some of you will be. So
yeah, exactly. But
awesome.
well, I really appreciate everyone's attention and time, and it was really fun. So
thank you. I am going to, and before I forget, for everybody on our March featured winery of the month, Martha, go ahead and earmuffs so you don't hear us. No. Is going to be another one that Allison brought to us, one we're really excited about. It's Soul Miner Wines. We're moving down the coast in Santa Barbara, Los Olivos, focused on German varietals. So we're going to have a dry Riesling,
and Rhone.
Yes, but we're going to be focusing on the German side of things, in terms of a dry Riesling, a Gruner Veltliner. I guess that's more Danube than Rhone. But most importantly, a Blaufränkisch, which I'm super, super, super excited about on the red side. So domestic California Blaufränkisch, something super rare that we're going to be drinking. It should be a lot of fun. The email will go out next week, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you, Martha, for sending the URL. We will, when we send out the link to the video tomorrow, I will send out a link to your website as well so people can buy from it. I'm going to stop the recording now. And Martha, I know your son is beckoning, but I don't know if you can stick around if anybody has any questions.
yeah, I've got a few minutes if anyone has any questions, and I'm also just excited about that Blaufränkisch you all are going to